"You saw it pour," she said. Not a question. I saw it pour. The recut held. It was the most beautiful thing in the room. It was, wasn't it? My Playful Wife. Episode 33. The December Room. Written by Mia. The room they gave her for the show was long and white and full of December light, and I took up my position the way I always do, at the edge of it, near the back, where I do my best living. I have thought about this over the years, why I am always at the edge of the rooms that are hers, and whether it is a failing. A husband, the world might say, should be at her side, in the photographs, sharing the light. And I have stood at her side when she wanted me there, and I will again. But the truth is that the edge of the room is not where I hide. It is where I work. Because from her side, I can only see what she sees. The buyers' faces arranged into the polite masks people wear when they are deciding whether to want something. From the edge, the back, the corner by the window, I can see the things she cannot see from inside it. I can see the whole room receiving her. I can watch the cloth do its work on 100 strangers at once. I can watch the mask slip. That is my place at her shows, and it took me years to understand it was not a lesser place, but a different and necessary one. She makes the thing. I witness what the thing does. Somebody has to stand where the maker cannot stand and watch the world meet the work and bring the report home. My father stood at the edges of rooms too. I have come to realize, though for the opposite reason, he stood at the edge because he could not bear to be in the middle of anything, because feeling was a country he had been taught to mistrust, and a crowd was too much of it at once. For years I assumed I had simply inherited his corner standing, the same flinch in a newer body. It took me a long time to understand that I stand at the edge for the inverse of his reason. Not to escape the room's feeling, but to receive all of it, the whole room's worth, which you cannot do from the warm, crowded center where you only ever get your own. The collection walked in, piece by piece, and the December room went quiet in the particular way a room goes quiet when it had not expected to be moved and is being moved against its will. I will not describe all of it. I do not have the vocabulary, and anyway the cloth is hers to describe, and mine only to witness. But I had been in the workroom now. I had sat on the stool, and so I saw the show with the clumsy new literacy she had given me. I could see, this time, the grain. I could see which pieces were cut straight, honest and architectural and still, and which were cut on the bias, pouring and alive, moving with the bodies that wore them as if the cloth were a thing that had decided, on its own, to follow a person through the world. I had never seen her work this way before. For years I had seen nice clothes. Now I saw the decisions, the difficulty, the places where she had chosen the hard cut and paid for it in wasted cloth and broken sleep, and the seeing turned the whole show from a pretty event into something closer to watching a person say, out loud, and in public, in a language of thread, the truest things she knew. It is a strange grief, learning late to read your own wife's life work, because you cannot help tallying the years you spent illiterate beside it. Every cut I now understood was a cut I had once walked straight past. Every difficult, alive, bias-cut piece was a sentence she had been saying in thread for the whole length of our marriage, in plain sight, on the racks in the next room, while I asked what was for dinner. I do not flog myself for it anymore. The self-flogging is only another way of making her work about me. But I note it, the lost years of illiteracy, the way you note the price of a thing you intend never to pay again. And then the centerpiece came. The rose dark, the seventh piece. The one that had twisted on the table 11 days before and broken her heart and sent her back to recut it from not enough cloth with one pass of the scissors and no margin for a second mistake. I had watched her recut it. I had brought her chai at 2 a.m. the night she laid the pattern and did not speak and did not breathe wrong near her while she found the true of the grain by touch and committed. And here it came into the December room on a living body, and I stopped breathing again at the back by the window because I knew exactly what was at stake in the way the rest of the room could not. It poured. It fell off the shoulder and down the body the way water finds the low place, the way the bias cut remnant had poured off the cutting table the night she taught me, fluid and alive, and following the living shape while it lived. The recut had held. The true cut, found by a tired woman's hands at 2 a.m. under a single lamp, had held, and the rose-dark cloth moved through the white December room like a slow flame, and the mask slipped, all of them, all across the room at once, and I watched it happen from the only place you can watch it happen. And I had to put my hand flat against the cold window glass because something enormous was going through my chest, and I did not want to make a sound and take even a particle of the room's attention off her. There was a woman near the front who wept. I had heard of her, in a way, Saloni had told me, a year and more ago, about a buyer from Ahmedabad who had once wept when she touched a length of the rose dark, a woman to whom a dress had arrived at its weeper. As Saloni put it, the maker's highest and most private award, not the sale, not the press, but the one stranger in the room for whom the cloth turns out to have been, somehow, secretly about her. I do not know if it was the same woman. I think, from the way Saloni's eyes went to her and softened, that it might have been. But there she was, near the front, an ordinary well-dressed woman in late middle age, and when the rose-dark centerpiece poured past her, she put her hand to her mouth and her eyes filled and spilled, quietly, not performing it, trying in fact to hide it, undone by a thing made of cloth and a stranger's 2 a.m. hands. And I understood, watching her, something about what my wife actually does for a living, which is not clothes. What Saloni does is find, in cloth, the thing a person did not know they were carrying, and give it back to them in a form they can wear. The weeping woman was not crying about a dress. She was crying because something true and probably wordless inside her had been seen and named and made beautiful by a person who had never met her, and that is not dressmaking. That is closer to what the priests are supposed to do, and mostly don't. I looked at the weeping woman, and then at my wife across the room, gracious among the buyers, and I felt the specific vertigo of being married to someone whose gift is larger than the daily life that contains it. We argue about whose turn it is to call the plumber. She forgets where she has put her own glasses and sends me to find them. And then she walks into a white room and quietly undoes a stranger with a length of cloth, and you remember, with a small shock, that the person across the breakfast table from you is, in some chamber of herself you mostly never get to see, enormous. I had married a woman who could do that, and for years I had said nice, very nice about it on my way to something else, and the not seeing of it had been its own kind of small daily sin, and I was done with it, and I was so proud of her in that December room that I could hardly hold my own ribs. And then, across the whole crowded room, in the middle of her triumph, she found my eyes. I do not know how she did it. There were 100 people between us, and every one of them wanting a piece of her, the buyers and the press and the young makers who had come to see how it was done, and she was at the center of all of it, gracious and luminous and entirely in her power. And in the middle of it she turned her head, once, and looked across the whole length of the white December room, past every face that wanted her, and found me at the back, by the window, with my hand still flat on the cold glass, and she gave me the look. The color of it, the private sentence, the one our family speaks without words, the language we built in the bad year and have spoken every day since. The look said, there you are. The look said, you saw it, didn't you? You saw what it did. The look said the thing that the whole crowded room of her triumph could not give her, and that only the man at the edge could, which was, I am witnessed. Not by the buyers who see a product, by the one person who sat on the stool and knows what the centerpiece cost and watched it pour true and understands all the way down exactly what just happened in this room. She had 100 people telling her she was brilliant. She turned away from all of them for 1 second to check that the witness had seen. And I had, and I let her see that I had, across the whole length of the room, without a word, and something passed between us in that one held look that was worth more than the entire white roomful of praise. And then she turned back and gave the room her face again, and only I knew where she had just been. People talk about the grand declarations of love, the ones with witnesses and rings, and a hall full of relatives. I have come, over the years, to trust the small private ones more. The big declarations need the audience a little to feel real. That is partly what they are for. The small ones need no one. That look had cost her a single second of a triumph 1,000 people had come a long way to give her, and she had spent the second on me, at the back, by the window, and the spending was the whole proof of the thing, precisely because no one but the two of us would ever know that it had been spent. I have been given a great deal in my life that I did not earn. That look across that room, in the middle of that triumph, is near the top of the list of things I will be grateful for on the day I die. I did not need any of it to be about me. That was the other thing I understood, standing at the edge with my hand on the glass, and it is a thing I want to write down plainly, because it is rarer than it should be, and I had to learn it late. There is a way of loving an accomplished person that is really a way of feeding on them, of standing near the light so that some of it falls on you, of being the husband of converting her triumph into your own reflected importance. I have seen it. I have felt the pull of it. There is a version of me, in some other life where the balcony morning never came, who is at her side in every photograph, taking his quarter of the credit by proximity, needing the room to know that the brilliant woman goes home with him. And I felt, in the December room, the deep, clean pleasure of wanting absolutely none of that. Her triumph did not need to be partly mine for me to be glad of it. In fact, the gladness was purer for being entirely hers. I got to feel the whole thing, undiluted by any anxiety about my own share, precisely because I had no share and wanted none. The witness does not need credit. The witness gets something better than credit, which is the thing itself, seen whole, from the one place it can be seen whole, with nothing in the way. To stand at the edge of someone's triumph wanting nothing from it but their joy, that is a discipline too, I think, a cousin of the bias cut, another way of staying awake. The sleeping husband takes his credit and calls it support. The awake one stands at the back, by the window, and just lets her be great, and counts himself lucky to have been in the room. I think this is one of the quiet tests of a long marriage, and one almost nobody names. Not whether you can survive each other's failures, which everyone frets about, but whether you can survive each other's successes. Failure draws people together. There is a cheap intimacy in disaster that asks no virtue at all of you. Success is the harder test. To watch the person you love become larger, maybe, than you, and to feel only gladness and no smallness, no clench of comparison, no sour private need to be reminded that you matter too. That is a thing a person has to grow into. I was in that December room, only just beginning to be big enough for it. We did not get to speak until much later, when the room had emptied and the cloth was being packed and the December dark had come down outside the long windows. She found me still near the back. The luminous public face was gone. What was left was the other one, the tired private one, the one only I get. And here was the thing I had not expected, the thing that seeded the unease I would carry home. At the very height of it, the show a triumph, the centerpiece a marvel. The weeper wept, the buyers buying. She looked, underneath the tiredness, not elated but strangely, quietly hollow. As if the things she had poured 2 years and 4 collections and 1,002 in the morning hours into had crested and broken and was now running back out to sea and left her standing on a wet beach in the dark wondering what it had all been for. "You saw it pour," she said. Not a question. I saw it pour. The recut held. It was the most beautiful thing in the room. It was, wasn't it? She said it without vanity, the simple craftsman's assessment, and then she looked at the packed cloth, the emptied room, the triumph already becoming a memory, and something crossed her face that I did not have a name for yet, but would learn the name of in the days after. "So why," she said, very quietly, almost to herself, "does the top of the mountain always feel so much like the empty bit at the end of something?" I did not have an answer. I had the new discipline, though, which is sometimes the same as an answer. I did not try to fix it or argue her out of it or tell her she should be happy. I just took her bag of scissors and chalk so she would not have to carry it, and I stood with her in the emptied December room while the hollow things she could not name moved through her, and I witnessed that too, the strange grief that lives, apparently, on the far side of getting exactly what you worked for. I wrote it in the 5th notebook that night, while she slept the flat, exhausted sleep of after. The December room, the centerpiece poured, the recut held, the true cut found at 2 a.m. by her hands held in front of 200 strangers. A woman wept. Saloni found my eyes across the whole room in the middle of her triumph to check the witness had seen. The whole crowded roomful of praise, and she turned from it for 1 second to the man at the back. I will be grateful for that look on the day I die. And then, at the top of the mountain, the hollow. Why does the top always feel like the empty bit at the end of something? I don't know yet, but I know the new rule covers this too. You don't fix the hollow, you don't argue it away, you witness it at full size and you carry the bag of scissors. Stayed awake for her win, and for the strange grief on the far side of it. The awake years aren't only for the hard days. They're for the great days too, which turn out to have their own difficulty that nobody warns you about. The long quiet after the thing you wanted arrives. I closed the notebook. The December dark was full at the windows. The show was over. The collection sold. The maker asleep and emptied beside me. And I lay awake on purpose in the dark, witness to a triumph and to the odd hollow on the other side of it. And I thought, tomorrow there will be the empty room, the morning after the mountain, and she will not know what to do with herself, and that. The come down, the after, the wet beach in the dark, will be its own thing to stay awake for. I intend to be awake for it. It is harder in its way than the show. I am learning that the great days ask as much attention as the terrible ones. Nobody tells you that. The notebooks are how I am teaching it to myself. To be continued in episode 34, The Empty Room.
Simbolo di copyright mia.
All rights reserved. That was episode 33 of My Playful Wife. If this story is staying with you, the next episode is already waiting. Subscribe so you don't miss it. The complete book is on Amazon, and early episodes plus bonus chapters are on my Patreon. Links are in the description.
Mia.
Thank you for listening.